Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. And today I thought we'd talk about something very different than the normal type of thing I've discussed on this channel in the past. So if you're only interested in the true crime stuff, this really might not end up being the video for you. It's going to have a lot of twists and turns, but I'm genuinely not really all that sure how people are going to respond to this. This is going to be about philosophy and ideas, and at times I think I'm worried it might come across as unintentionally preachy. So all I can ask is that you watch the video with an open mind. I'm not setting out to be preachy, but this is a topic that I've wanted to discuss for a very long time, and I've ended up questioning a lot of things in my life as a result of it. And honestly, given the way things seem to be going right now in the world, I thought, now was the perfect time to bring it up. So with that being said, today I want to talk about someone I really look up to just about more than anyone, and that person was at one time the world champion of chess.
Good to see you. Nice to have you with us. Again, we're going to call this young gentleman Mr. X. Will you tell us how old you are and where you're from?
I'm 15, I'm from Brooklyn.
He is 15 years old and he is from Brooklyn. All right? Will you show your headline to camera 3 and to Dick Clark, because we'll make him go to work on you. It says, teenager strategy defeats all comers.
This strategy, did it involve finances?
No,
Did you have any help?
no.
Did it all by yourself? Did it make people happy?
Made me happy.
That's a good start. Good start. Did what you do have its effect indoors?
Yes.
Did it have?
All right, Dick, we've gone down the drain. This young man's name is Bobby Fischer. He is 15 years old. And listen to this. Already, he is the United States chess champion.
If I was to tell you that when I was growing up, Bobby Fischer was my hero, I really wouldn't be doing it justice. I borderline idolized Bobby Fischer, and I wanted to be like him more than anything in the world. I was obsessed with chess, and to me, and many other people in the world, Bobby Fischer was the greatest chess player who had ever lived. I can't tell you how many nights I stayed up, glued to my chessboard, poring over the games that Bobby played in just total amazement. It was like someone who loved art finally getting to see a Da Vinci for the first time. Bobby was a poet on the chessboard, but off the chessboard, he was somehow even more complicated than his games were. Now, this video isn't going to be about Bobby's whole life, but instead it's going to be about one specific part of it. But in order to get there, I have to give you a bit of a brief overview of just who he was and what he meant to me. So, when I was growing up and playing chess, I was growing up in the 1980s during the height of the Cold War. And think of the fat kid with no teeth from Stranger Things, and that was me, to the T. Except without the Demogorgon or really anything remotely cool for that matter.
At the age of 13, he played this amazing match against Donald Byrne.
Extraordinary, incredible game for anybody, and for a 13-year-old, it's virtually unbelievable. First of all, it was a queen sacrifice. Queen is the strongest piece on the board, and if you give it up, you usually lose. The game is over. Hans Kmach, who was a leading chess author and analyst of the day, called it the game of the century, and title sticks to this day.
When Bobby was 13 years old in 1956, we were approximately of the same strength. I was 19, and we played about equally. A year later, when he was 14, he was clearly better than I or anyone else in the United States.
Age 14, he became US champion. Age 15, he became the youngest grandmaster in history.
By then, everybody knew we had a genius on our hands.
The amazing Bobby Fischer. He replayed for the spectators the game in which he won the U.S. national championship.
From the time he was 13 or 14, he was a celebrity.
Here, chess players old and young competed against Bobby Fischer as he played 25 games simultaneously without a loss.
Bobby Fischer was the youngest U.S. chess champion ever, and at the time, the youngest grandmaster ever, and also went on to be the youngest world champion ever. But more than that, Bobby wasn't from Russia, and at that time in chess, there was the Russians, and then there was everybody else. Russia completely dominated chess. Bobby was a nobody kid from nowhere America who was a chess prodigy and the living embodiment that America was truly great.
Try not to giggle here in class. But for the past year or so, the American chess genius Bobby Fischer has been, I think, wading through all the best chess players in the world on his way to the World Championship. Last time he was on this show, he said he'd be playing the Russian Grandmaster Boris Spassky after he had polished off another Russian master, Tigran Petrosian. And polished off seemed kind of arrogant, but he's here tonight. He polished him off, and just as he promised. And the World Championship will take place sometime later this year. And someone recently said about him at a match at the Manhattan Chess Club where he beat everybody in sight with no problems. He's just the greatest chess player who ever walked the earth. Will you watch him walk the earth out to this chair? Mr. Bobby Fischer.
To say that at the time Russia completely dominated chess really isn't giving it the credit it's due. Russian children who showed potential in chess were handpicked by the government when they were little kids, and they were trained their entire lives to become chess masters. And at that time, the best of that Russian machine was a man named Boris Spassky.
What Rod Laver is to tennis, what Jack Nicklaus is to golf, that's what Bobby Fischer is to chess. And on June the 22nd, unless arrangements fall apart, and in the stormy world of chess anything can happen, Bobby Fischer of the United States will finally meet Boris Spassky of the Soviet Union in Belgrade, Yugoslavia, for the chess championship of the world. At stake, immense prestige for the Russians, who jealously guard their reputation as the country of the chess masters.
The world had been dominated in chess by hand-picked, trained Russian chess players, and Bobby found himself as the poster boy for the American idea. When Bobby Fischer played Boris Spassky, he wasn't just playing a game of chess. He was fighting in the Cold War, and the whole country was behind him.
The conditions were met, and on July 11th, 1972, the match began.
Game one's an amazing game. Bobby plays a move that club players know not to play. He takes a pawn with his bishop. A rook pawn allows his bishop to be trapped.
The mistake cost Bobby the first game.
Well, I think he blundered, you know. I think that's pretty clear, you know. I think he was disturbed by some TV towers, you know, who were hanging over him there, you know.
There was a man by the name of Chester Fox who had the camera rights, and he had to wrap the cameras in burlap. Fischer said he could hear the cameras even. He even said he heard the cameras when they weren't even turned on.
Mr. Fox, yes. If it's not the noise that's bucking Mr. Fischer, what could it then be? I don't think anybody can tell you other than Bobby Fischer, and maybe he can't tell you.
Bobby insisted that the cameras be removed. The Icelanders refused. Game 2 also went to Spassky by forfeit.
He didn't show up for the second game and lost it too.
The championship is a best of 24, with both players earning a half point for a draw. The first to 12.5 points is the victor.
Tremendous disadvantage to be behind 2-0 at the start of a match.
That's 5-0 in the last inning. It's a very, very big hole.
But Bobby was unwavering, and he refused to continue unless the cameras were removed.
Then we decided, away with the cameras. We are not jeopardizing the mats for the cameras.
They end up moving Game 3 into a tiny little room at the back, which is normally used for table tennis. And it was possibly Boris Spassky's big mistake.
The Russians understood. They warned Spassky. They said, don't give in to him. Don't let him take control with his demands. Don't let it become his match, his tournament.
Mr. Spassky, are you happy with the arrangements for today's game?
He didn't need to agree to it. He could have stuck to his guns, and Fischer would have forfeited the World Championship, and Spassky would have remained world champion.
Instead, Bobby seized the momentum, winning Game 3.
That was a tremendous moment because it was the first time in his life Fischer had beaten Spassky. And it also indicated to us that Spassky wasn't quite on his game. He may have been rattled by all the shenanigans that had already happened.
I don't think Fischer deliberately played psychological games, but the effect of his demands was to psychologically destroy his opponents.
He won 6.5 out of his next 8 games, which it just doesn't make any sense against a player of Spassky's caliber.
The Soviets even begin to wonder whether the CIA are poisoning Spassky. They check the chairs, they take the lights apart, and all they can find are 2 dead flies.
A sample of his orange juice is flown to a KGB laboratory in Moscow for testing.
They were measuring all kinds of beams and rays that could get into there.
It can't be the case that Spassky is just crumbling like this in the face of Fischer's psychological onslaught.
No evidence was discovered, and the match continued.
I think the second half of this match, there was much more of a fight somehow, you know, because Spassky had, you know, he had regained his composure, he had also regained his self-confidence, you know.
But Game 11 would be Spassky's last victory. After 7 consecutive draws, Bobby was on the verge of winning the title. Midway through the 21st game, Spassky conceded. The World Championship belonged to Fischer.
What does it feel like after 20 years to suddenly become the world champion?
Feels pretty good. I can't say I was actually crying, but I was misting up. I felt extremely proud that Bobby finally made it, and he was an American, and he had defeated the Soviets.
In the name of FIDE, the International Chess Federation, I proclaim Mr. Robert Fischer as the chess champion of the world.
Bobby Fischer was the champion of the world. He ended up vacating his title, but at that time, he crushed the greatest mind that communism could produce and was honestly one of the most beloved people in the entire country. I can't truly explain to you in this video just how much people in America loved him. He was borderline a national treasure. I was 10 years old, long after Bobby's time, when I played my first competitive chess tournament in the late 1980s. And I refused to use a Russian chess open. I only used openings that Bobby Fischer used. I loved chess, I loved He-Man, and I despised communism. Bobby Fischer was absolute proof to me that America was better than anyone else in every possible way. We were free, and the Russians were cold, callous, programmed people with programmed minds. They were almost subhuman to me, and I can't really do justice to just how much Americans hated Russia at that time and what it was like growing up thinking that Russia was going to be responsible for World War III.
What's going on here, my friend?
This is the emergency broadcast system. We are under attack by conventional forces of the Russian army. It is believed the lead waves were disguised as commercial charter flights. Communications have broken down with other parts of the country. Large areas of the Midwest may have been overrun.
When I was young, the current world champion was a man named Garry Kasparov. He was a Russian chess player, and I hated Garry Kasparov and everything about him. Long after the Soviet Union was gone, even after Kasparov had defended his title for years and years, I just wouldn't allow myself to like the guy. I couldn't deny that he was one of chess' greatest players to ever play the game, but I hated him. And the irony was, when I bought my very first electronic chessboard, it was a Kasparov chessboard. And I remember very clearly taking a piece of electrical tape and covering up his name with it.
No, the move that Karpov was so unhappy with. Queen e8. He felt this was a critical error. Does the champion share his opinion on this move?
Knight takes h6.
So he did not see this move?
He didn't. I didn't calculate it. I knew that it should win.
I saw you playing very quickly this
I
game over
didn't
the
calculate.
board.
It's just saw several lines. White's winning because I have 7 pieces in the attack. 2 bishops, 2 knights, 2 rooks, and rooks is attack to queen. He has some pieces protected. Okay, rook, 2 pawns, and bishop, and maybe queen. Okay, we can change, you know. It's an equal change. I change 1 attacking piece for 1 defensive piece, but I have enough pieces to make it.
So, let's have a look. Knight takes.
h6, he played c3, you know.
And now, why didn't he take?
Okay, if he takes here, it's very nice. I took knight takes d6. Now I can show you many good, interesting lines. Number 1, if he's trying to escape with him. Queen d7. Then I played queen g4. Queens. If he takes here, then bishop takes g7, mate.
So bishop takes.
Bishop takes, queen takes.
This is mate.
Mate, yes. If he takes
your queen
with
now.
a rook, wait, so with then check. And if he cannot
because check,
and this is pinned, the pawn is pinned, and the king g8 is a mate in several moves. Bishop h7, bishop g6, and queen h7 mate.
But back to my story. So when Bobby Fischer won the world championship, that's not where things ended at all. That's actually where things started getting weird, and it's really the true heart of this video and where it begins. Because when Bobby Fischer was on top of the world champion, at his absolute greatest moment when he was loved by everyone, Bobby Fischer vanished.
Bobby stopped being involved with people that were reaching out and saying, I want to help you. Stopped taking care of himself, added weight.
Essentially, he began the process of isolating himself and retreating into his own world and his own mind and whatever was going on inside of that.
Unpredictable Bobby Fischer.
Nobody really knows why Bobby Fischer does or does not do anything.
The most individualistic, intransigent, uncommunicative, solitary chess master of all time.
He has no permanent home.
Fischer is a nomad.
Speaks to almost no one.
No contact with his family. Troubled childhood. He hasn't seen his mother in over 10 years.
The warning signs that something was wrong with Bobby were there the whole time, but people were so focused on beating the Russians that no one even seemed to care. Bobby was talking about being able to hear the cameras when they were turned off. He had suitcases full of pills that were going to help him prevent getting poisoned, all the outrageous demands. Most people point to the moment Bobby vanished as the time that he started to get sick, but I think in hindsight it was well before that.
One of his opponents said that he wandered around with a suitcase full of Chinese pills because they were going to be antidotes for any poisoning attempt that the Soviets made on him.
His paranoia, that everybody was after him.
And then there's a famous surreal incident in 1981 where he is picked up and mistaken for a bank robber and writes a pamphlet, I was tortured in a Pasadena jailhouse. And it contains various bizarre allegations.
He signed it, of course, Robert J. Fischer, world chess champion. After, of course, the title had passed on. The title he felt he had always had, he never relinquished in his mind.
As Bobby disappeared into seclusion, his whereabouts and his actions became a mystery.
There were always rumors of him going to bookstores in Los Angeles looking for neo-Nazi books, breaking off relationships with people because they were Jewish.
It was almost like Bobby fell off the face of the earth. He would resurface from time to time, but when he did, something was just off. He seemed really different, very angry. He eventually came out of retirement to rematch Spassky in Yugoslavia, but at the time of the rematch, there were actually UN sanctions against the country, and Bobby was told by the US government that he wasn't allowed to play, that he would go to prison if he did. And well, this is how Bobby responded to that.
Year after year, Bobby rejected offers to return to the chess world. Then, a teenage girl changed the course of history.
A wonderful young woman from Hungary wrote him this terrific letter beautiful writing, 16 years old. And she said, "What are you doing not playing chess? You're the Mozart of the era. You're the Einstein. You're the greatest champion that's ever lived. Why are you not playing anymore?"
The girl, Zita Rashanyi, became Bobby's pen pal when a Yugoslavian sponsor put up a $5 million purse to lure Bobby out of retirement. Zita convinced him to accept, but not everyone liked what they saw. In September of 1992, in Sveti Stefan, Yugoslavia, Bobby Fischer played a rematch against Boris Spassky, 20 years after they'd competed for the World Championship. The event was beset by controversy.
This was the height of the Yugoslav Civil War, and there were United Nations sanctions which prohibited commercial relations with Yugoslavia. The United States Treasury Department wrote to Bobby Fischer to warn him about this.
Should Bobby choose to play the match and accept his winnings, the penalty would be a $250,000 fine and 10 years in prison.
So this is my reply to their order not to defend my title here. That's my answer.
Bobby ignored the warning and defeated Spassky again. He took the money, more than $3 million, and ran.
The warrant was issued against him, which is still in force. And at that point, his wanderings outside the United States began.
Bobby went to Hungary with Zita after the championship. He was in love with her. He wanted very much to make it. She took off with another guy. Painful. This was possibly his only true love.
At this point in my life, I wasn't really following Bobby like I used to. I was still under the impression that he had just vanished. I hadn't heard any of the clips of him going on tirades, and so I didn't know any of it. And there was even movies being made about him at the time called Searching for Bobby Fischer that were implying that he was still gone. And that was until 9/11, when Bobby Fischer, the greatest chess player the world had ever seen, went on the radio and said this.
He first now comes back into the public imagination with these wild anti-American, anti-Semitic rants that he gives on Philippine radio.
Well, this is all wonderful news. It's time for the U.S. to get their heads kicked in. It's time to finish off the U.S. once and for all. I say, death to President Bush, I say. Death to the United States. The United States, the Jews. The Jews are criminal people. They mutilate their children. They're murderous, criminal, thieving, lying bastards. They made up the Holocaust as our word of truth to them.
He was increasingly obsessed with these anti-Semitic issues. He wasn't playing chess anymore. So this was taking up more and more space.
He said things like all the Jews in America should be rounded up. I mean, it's horrendous.
Close down all the synagogues, arrest all the Jews, execute hundreds of thousands of Jewish ringleaders.
Despite having a Jewish mother, Bobby has never considered himself Jewish.
His anti-Semitism was a mindset. It was a sort of psychopathic illness which he couldn't shake off.
I can't even begin to tell you how all of it made me feel. I actually was devastated by it. Someone who I'd spent my whole life admiring was an anti-Semitic, Holocaust-denying hate monger who hated America. It was unforgivable to me. I was genuinely heartbroken by it. This person who I'd put on this pedestal, who I'd built up, who I wanted to be more like than anything, I wanted to emulate them more than anything in the world, was someone I hated.
So, the U.S. is deadly serious about putting me in prison for 10 years for playing chess. And I think, as far as I know, I'm the only person that the U.S. has indicted on this law. So far as I know, maybe someone else is, I haven't heard about it. I think I'm the only person. Because the Jews totally control the U.S. The U.S. government is a facade. There is no U.S. government as people think of it. It's just a puppet in the Jews' hands. It's a plaything for the Jews.
Bobby was eventually arrested in Japan, and he was released to the only country, basically, that would take him, and that was Iceland. Ironically, the place where he had played the World Championship matches so many years ago against Spassky. They had granted him citizenship and taken him in.
I think I have some kind of affinity to show business, yeah.
He just walked out of the plane and he was ushered aside by police.
Yeah, you buckle up, Bobby. I remember you always wanted to buckle up, remember?
Yeah, right. This is it? This is it here?
Yeah, right. Hey, buckle up.
You are our prisoner. You will do everything we tell you. Do you understand that? You will never disobey us. Do you understand that? I say, yeah. Then they all let go. Then I punched one of the guards in the face, you know, very hard.
Yeah.
And then they were very vicious. They put my hands behind my back in some kind of arm cuff, not just a handcuff.
No, the arm
very
cuff
painful.
to hang you up.
Very high up. And like double. And one of them was very tight. Two of them were tight here, and they were cutting the circulation for about an hour and a half.
Blood, yeah. Oh, Jesus.
And then after about an hour and a half, they loosened it a little bit. But they took it off after about 2 hours. Just tortured me for no reason.
Yeah, you showed to me when I came to you. You showed me through the glass, remember?
Let me take my sweater off, too.
Yeah, it's very hot in here.
Total rubbish, you know. This had nothing to do with the law. This was 100% political.
I know.
Bobby Fischer died alone in Iceland at the age of 64, and almost no one went to his funeral. One of the greatest minds of my time died as a complete pariah, shunned and hated and alone. And the person that was once one of the most loved people in America's death was barely even mentioned on the news.
Bobby Fischer became America's first and only world chess champion in 1972 in a classic Cold War showdown against Russian Boris Spassky. He scooped the crown again in 1992 in Yugoslavia, also against Spassky, but this time the battle came with a price for Fischer. The contest put him on the US wanted list for breaching economic sanctions against Belgrade for its war on breakaway republics. He vanished from view with the $3 million prize money and stayed that way until 2001. He finally re-emerged to praise the September 11th attacks on the US and said in a radio interview he wanted to see his native America wiped out. Fischer, who also stirred anger with anti-Semitic remarks, had his US passport revoked 2 years later. He was granted Icelandic citizenship in March 2005 after 8 months in detention in Japan fighting a US deportation order. His death at the age of 64 comes after a life of controversy, hailed by many as an eccentric and by some chess experts as the greatest player of all time. Paul Chapman, Reuters.
So-called title matches.
Now that I'm older, I look at Bobby Fischer much differently than I did when I first heard the things he said. I actually ended up becoming really interested in true crime stories, and, you know, here I am making YouTube videos about them. It's like chess to me. I try to get in my opponent's mind, I try to figure out what their next move would be. And if I've learned anything from studying true crime, it's that you can't go very far with it without at least attempting to understand psychology on some level.
In 2002, a stunning secret about Bobby's paternity was discovered.
There wasn't a whole lot known about Gerhard Fischer, and when we started digging into it, we discovered that, in fact, Gerhard Fischer had never actually really been part of Bobby's life, that he never actually ever entered the United States.
All evidence points to the father being Paul Nemenyi, who was a Hungarian physicist who died in the early 1950s.
It wasn't clear whether they ever actually told Bobby that Paul was his real father.
Beyond the physical resemblance, Bobby and Paul Nemenyi seem to share certain personality traits.
Nemenyi was a very interesting character. According to one former co-worker who we interviewed, he had a habit of carrying soap around in his pockets at all times so that he could wash his hands after he touched door handles.
He was an animal rights activist. He did not believe in wearing wool. He would occasionally walk around with his pajamas sticking out from underneath his clothing.
Bobby appears to have inherited more than just his father's eccentricities.
Nemenyi had this, as I read, he had this phenomenal spatial ability. He apparently thought and looked at issues in ways that no one else did. It was unique.
In chess, you have to visualize how a board with 64 black and white squares that's filled with maybe 24 pieces, how it might look 10 moves down the line. That's all about spatial relations.
It really seems like there are a lot of parallels in the way that they thought.
There remains one final twist to the revelation of Bobby's biological father. Paul Nemenyi was Jewish, and so Bobby Fischer, arguably the world's most vocal anti-Semite, is the product of not one, but two Jewish parents.
Paul Nemenyi's life and career were ruined by the Nazis. He was fired from his university teaching job in Germany because he was Jewish. And to have a son then who has somehow grasped on to anti-Semitism as a cause is incredibly ironic.
The absolute criminals, the Jews. The Jews are behind this. It's a filthy Jew country.
I can't tell you how many cases I've looked at where I couldn't help but wonder how the person that was responsible for the crime was able to function in society at all without some type of mental health intervention. The first person that comes to mind actually is Ricardo Lopez, and I did a video about him. And when I made that video about him and his eventual suicide, there was just so many times I really wish there had been someone there to step in, but there just wasn't. And that's exactly what it was like for Bobby. The more and more he pulled away and he went deeper into his psychosis, the more and more people actually ended up turning on him and turning him away instead of helping him.
I hate to, rap people personally, but his father, many, many years ago, befriended me. Took me out to see, I don't remember what.
Knicks games.
Knicks games, and
you were 12.
Acted kind of like a father figure. And then later, like a typical Jewish snake, he had the most vicious things to say about me.
I have to object.
Okay. Did you read what he said about me in that article?
I heard things that he said about
Did you read the article where he said I don't have a sane bone in my body?
Honestly, I'm not sure if I read it, but I know that he said it.
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't know that you've done much here today, really, to disprove anything he said.
People who are mentally ill are more often than not stuck in this really unique dilemma. It's not like other illnesses where people who would normally care and step in and help, it's actually the exact opposite. Because it's invisible, and instead of seeing it for what it truly is, we just tend to hear the hateful words of the bizarre actions, and we actually end up doing our best to keep the person at a distance when they need someone the most.
You would never say to someone with a broken bone to just ignore their pain. That'll just pass one day. You would never say about someone who has cancer that they're just faking it. It's just all for attention. You would never say to someone in a wheelchair, just stand up. It's all in your head. You would obviously never say that to any of these kinds of people because they didn't ask for it in their life. It's not like they chose to put it in their life. It should be the same for any other sickness or disability. No one asked to put this into their life, so they can't just snap out of it. Unfortunately, many people with mental illness have been told at least once in their life, just snap out of it. Trust me, if I could snap out of my anxiety and my depression, I would have done it long before anybody had to tell me.
It's said that mental illness comes with a package of shame, and that when other parts of your body get sick, it comes with a package of sympathy. When I look back on Bobby Fischer now, I don't remember him for all the horrible things that his mental illness caused him to say. When I look back at Bobby, I think about what the world missed out at having, at what could have been had someone been there to help him, instead of using him to push some political ideology.
So he took it off this bishop. And he's threatening this pawn. I don't think he took his right away. Because he played here first.
The greatest, perhaps the greatest chess player in the world.
And now he took a look.
Bobby Fischer, United States, world title contender.
Now, black surprise with this one.
Man. Bobby Fischer's a strange man. People think that there's something wrong with the man.
And then the king moves. Takes the queen.
The great Bobby Fischer is here tonight.
I'd like you to meet.
He takes back, it gets checked.
looking for Bobby Fischer.
Whatever happened to Bobby Fischer?
Reclusive. Threatening his pawn, and it's a dead-lost game.
Bobby Fischer is searching for asylum.
Really Fischer against the world.
And here, what resigned.
Bobby Fischer's story should have been over here. This video should be ending now, but it's not. On the anniversary of Bobby Fischer's death, someone decided to come forward and give Bobby an actual funeral.
I can't help but thinking that this is the graveyard also for great unfulfilled hopes, because so much could be achieved, and this is the country where Robert Fischer reached his peak. But it was not only his peak, but it was one of the most glorious moments in the history of the game of chess, and it could have ended differently. So it's not for us to come up with hypothetical versions of alternative history, but it's still very sad. So it's as if that's this in this graveyard we could feel that so many great hopes and expectations have been buried without being realized. So it's all behind us. So it's all the controversies. So what is left is that the unique contribution of Robert James Fischer in the game of chess, and I'm here to pay this tribute.
Garry Kasparov, the man who I'd covered up his name with the electrical tape, had flown to Iceland on the anniversary of Bobby's death and held a memorial service. And when Bobby Fischer was actually alive and he was asked about what his thoughts on Kasparov were, he said, and I'm quoting, "I object to being called a chess genius because I consider myself an all-around genius who just so happens to play chess, which is rather different. A piece of garbage like Kasparov might be called a chess genius, but he's like an idiot savant. Outside of chess, he knows nothing." The man that Fischer said this about ended up being the only reason that Bobby Fischer had a true memorial service.
It's a huge sense of sadness because he stopped playing chess at age 29. It's insane. So how much can be done? So how much could be achieved? Just if not for this terrible tragedy that put him away of the game of chess. And again, now, after everything is behind us, all these controversies and all things that have been associated, unfortunately, with Fischer's name, what is left is just this sadness that he's gone, 1972. And what I couldn't help myself but thinking is I never met him, which is also quite amazing. So, okay, I was 9 at age, and at 9 in 1972 when he won the title, but still, there were many opportunities technically, but unfortunately, again, it didn't happen. That's something that, of course, I will be missing.
Imagine what it would take to host a memorial service for someone who'd ridiculed you, who was also so controversial that defending his memory very well might turn everyone you know against you and completely ruin you professionally, because that's what Garry Kasparov did. Even though it wasn't in his best interest at all, he still did what he felt was right.
Kasparov began touring representing the Soviet Union at age 13. His first shot at the world title, controversial, 48 games over 6 months against incumbent Anatoly Karpov.
I therefore declare that the match is ended without decision.
He finally defeated Karpov in 1985, the youngest world champion, and went on mastering one opponent after another.
You sense this energy and this
this destructive force. He has this desire to not just to beat opponents, but to destroy them.
That force is now aimed at Russian President Vladimir Putin. For 10 years, Kasparov's been an outspoken critic, mobilizing opposition.
See now the total collapse of the rule of law in Russia.
Those words got him arrested again. In 2013, Kasparov left Russia for good, settling in the US, taking on human rights, and still trying to check his most formidable opponent, President Putin.
I started this video by saying that I wanted to tell you about someone that I looked up to just about more than anyone else, and that person was once the world champion of chess. Garry Kasparov is one of the greatest champions for human rights alive in the world today. It's ironic that his desire to stick up for people like Bobby Fischer, to stand up to power and try to protect sick and vulnerable people, actually ended up hurting him in a lot of ways. He's been beaten, nearly killed, and had to live his life knowing that his enemies would most likely finish the job if they were given the opportunity. Most of the best decisions Garry has ever made were, at the time, not in his best interest. I'm sure that there were more than a few people in his life that tried to tell him that he was making the wrong move. I've left links in the description below to the Human Rights Foundation that Garry is the chair of. And as always, thank you for watching.
Champion Bobby Fischer has died at the age of 64. Fischer was the man who finally ended Soviet dominance of the game. He became the first American to win the World Championship back in 1972. Many considered him one of the greatest players of all time. Passed away in Iceland after a long illness. Garry Kasparov is a Russian chess grandmaster. He's on the line now from Moscow. Thank you for joining us on Afternoon Live. How should we remember him, do you think?
Fischer was one of the greatest names in our history. I was 9 years old when he had this triumph in Reykjavik in 1972, and I remember that everybody followed Fischer, his games, his statements. It was very fresh, innovative chess, and I think we will not overestimate by saying that his contribution was revolutionary, both at the chessboard and also in his fight to improve conditions for chess players, and he could be called the pioneer and founder of professional chess.